have the energy and kind of passion for this debate. We're going to kick off with a poll, I think. Charlotte, can we get the poll? We can, yes. So this is just to start us off. If you could answer the question on your screen. So has your organisation been involved in a community-led housing partnership before? It's great for us to get a sense about if people here are interested in this, having done it, or interested in it because it's not something that they've done before. And a pretty interesting split, I think. Great to see so many people voting. Thank you. Right, so 63% of people say yes, their organisation has been involved in a community-led housing partnership, and 38% say no. So that's, thank you very much. And yes, I think the chat's working again, so please do post your name and or organisation in there. So I'm especially kind of excited about this event this morning because I think partnership is hard. I think it's absolutely essential if we are going to get anywhere near solving the housing crisis. I'm sure, like many of you, I get quite frustrated that quite often we have a new thing announced as a kind of panacea or silver bullet as to how we're going to, build all the homes we need. It's community-led housing, it's council housing, it's housing associations. Actually, the truth is it's all of that and then some. And I think the only way that we can possibly achieve what we all want to and build the homes that we desperately need, especially the affordable homes, is if we work in partnership. But that isn't always easy. So I think the kind of practical examples that the guide that Community-Led Housing are publishing today is really fascinating and really helpful to show what can be achieved. But I hope in this discussion today, we can also reflect on some of the things that make it difficult and some of the obstacles that need to be overcome, because we can't pretend that they don't exist. So we've got three great speakers to show you exactly how successful these partnerships can be. And then we're going to have three further speakers who are going to give you some brief kind of responses and reflections as well. So to kick off, we're going to hear from Tom Chance. He's the joint CEO of the National Community Land Trust Network. So Tom, over to you.
Thanks, Rachel. Reading this guide again, having worked on it a bit over the last year or so, I was thinking about North Ormsby, actually, and a couple of years ago I was able to go and visit a whole number of different projects around Middlesbrough, Stockton, Redcar and Cleveland. Makes me sad that we're all stuck in our rooms, we're not able to actually go out and see people in person and visit these schemes. And who I met there were various different communities, very passionate about trying to address the neglect and absentee landlords issues, looking to house refugees, just generally willing to roll up their sleeves and improve their community, and with real ambitions to build homes or renovate homes in their local area. And of course, as this guide mentions in the case of North Ormsby, and across the wider kind of Tees Valley region, they've been able to do this more effectively because in many cases they're able to do that in partnership with other housing associations like 13 and Accent. This year I did get to go and visit one project in the summer. I visited South Petherton CLT in Somerset, standing at a distance, not able to go and look in the homes, just kind of wandering around outside, chatting to one person, who is the chair of the CLT. He is retired, but rents privately in the village and is acutely aware of the need for more affordable homes, and also very aware of the wider needs in their village. And there's an existing community hall that is too small and not really fit for purpose. So having completed some homes with Stonewater, they're now looking at that hall and other things they can do in their community, so that community really thrives. And these people I meet when I go and talk with community-led housing groups are very similar in a way to the people who 50 or 60 years ago started some of the housing associations that today have tens of thousands or even over 100,000 units in their stock. There's a real shared aims and values between community-led housing groups and housing associations. And in many cases, I've seen how they're each able to bring something to each other that's valuable. And the community values the professionalism, the skills and experience, the access to finance that housing associations can bring to different sorts of projects. and housing associations can value the skills and experience and local understanding and ability to work with the local community that a community-led housing might bring, as well as you'll see in this example, in this document, all sorts of other interesting ideas that they can both bring to the table. What we're hoping to do with this guide, which is based upon various documents that existed in previous years produced by ourselves at the National CLT Network, by Locality, by HACT, is to draw together material to do three things. One is to inspire more communities and housing associations to work together and to see how in partnership they might be able to achieve what they want to do. The second is to provide a whole range of examples of how this has been achieved, because very often we hear about one or two examples and we can imagine that, well, that's what it means to do a community-led housing association partnership. So it has to be exactly like the arrangement that South Petherton CLT has with Stonewater, or exactly like the relationship between North Ormsby, Accent and 13. And of course, that's not the case. There are lots of ways in which partnerships can work. And so this is not telling you how they should work, it's giving you examples for inspiration. The third was to draw on interviews with people who've been involved in these over the years to try to provide some guidance on how best to explore and implement a partnership. So there are some principles in there which are both for the, and it's important for us that we publish this in a way that is accessible and open to both people working in housing associations and the community-led housing groups. They're kind of both seeing the same advice, getting the same ideas about the ways in which those partnerships can work successfully, because we know that in sometimes they haven't been successful and sometimes there have been tensions between community land trusts or co-housing communities, co-ops and housing associations. So we really hope that the guidance is helpful, that it will lead to and inspire and support more partnerships being formed. And I'm looking forward to hearing the other speakers this morning talk about their particular examples. I didn't want to say much more than that this morning, other than that also this is for us part of work we will continue to do to try to support the partnership working with Place Shapers. Very, very grateful to Rachel and Charlotte for hosting us today, and also with the National Housing Federation, the Rural Housing Alliance, and other bodies in the housing association sector who've been involved in either producing this guide or this event. So thank you very much. I'll pass back to Rachel.
Thank you, Tom. That's a great overview of the guide, and it's been really fascinating to work on it with you, and we're very proud to be able to endorse it and to be part of this event this morning. So our next speaker is Sally Gilbert. She's the Development Director at United Communities Housing Association in Bristol. And back in the days when we were allowed to travel around the country and see what various brilliant organisations were up to, I went to United Communities. It was early in my days as Place Shapers Director. And when I started, lots of people had been telling me repeatedly how kind of big and corporate the housing association world was. And I went to United Communities office, and it's this lovely little office in a business park. And I walked in, and the first three people I spoke to were three people from the Community Land Trust. And it had a very kind of local friendly community feel, very, very different from the kind of picture that had been painted for me of the sector. And they've been doing some absolutely brilliant work in partnership with community-led housing groups there. So Sally, over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. That's done my introduction, so I don't need to say yes, I'm Sally Gilbert. We are, as Rachel said, a community-led housing association. We came out of a couple of very anchor organisations within communities. We've got a little bit bigger, but we still only have 2,000 homes. But we have 4 schemes. We've got quite an ambitious development programme, which those of you who know us will know that we do try and punch above our weight, albeit we've got some big guys quite near us. So, and we focus very much in Bristol, and that enables us to be a bigger player in terms of getting grant and supporting people. But one of our USPs really is that we are absolutely rooted in communities. And I was delighted when our board accepted the exec team's recommendation that our development strategy would have 30% community-led homes, either in partnership or supporting anchor organisations. And we have 4 of those in our pipeline, very different. All of them have, I had a good old read of the guide that we're launching today. And I won't go into detail about the makeup of the partnerships, because they basically replicate what is shown in the case studies in the guide. But we've done it very different ways. And as Rachel said, we started our journey with BCLT, Bristol Community Land Trust. We were part of that, getting them up off the ground. They've now very excitingly got these southwest or west of England hub working with them. And they're both based, when we live in a normal world, they're both based at our office. So it's great. And we started off with them at a smallish scheme in Fishponds, which is a sort of suburb of Bristol with 12 homes. And our biggest, and all I want you to go away with is, please be ambitious. It can be as small as 4 and as big as our scheme in Southmead, which is 120. And it's also got a library, a community, some other community facilities, and a health centre as part of it. And I'll show you some pictures in a second. We are, for those of you who know us, we're in the process of merging with Solon Southwest. That will pretty much double us in size when our development current development programme is finished. But so that will take us up to about 4,000. Still a nice size. And what I'm really delighted to say is that the newly merged board, we don't go live formally with the merge until the 1st of April, but the board has come together, is supporting the 30% for community-led homes. So we continue to, and I'm really pleased, because I love working within the community. It feels like that's what we're here to do, really making a difference, and recognising, as Rachel said, that it's not just about social housing. There is a wider range of people who need affordable housing, and you know, the very fact that shared ownership says that you mustn't earn in the household more than £80,000. That sounds like a huge amount of money to me. So it just shows you that we have to find different ways and expand our portfolios. And I'm really glad that that is in community-led housing. So I won't keep talking on. I will show you some pictures, hopefully. I'm hoping you can see that. I'm going to... so this was the first one, Fishponds Road. That was 12 units with BCLT. This is them doing some of the self-finish. So that's quite key, that it's quite different to the only difference really that we have outside of the case studies is that everybody gets involved in self-finish in some of the schemes, and that's Shaldon Road and Fishponds, where they install kitchens, they do decorating as a team. So Shaldon Road is also having that. It's a kind of co-housing living. So we've got as you can see at the bottom right, we've got a community building. This is it in construction. This is our biggie, 120 homes with Southmead Development Trust, who are an anchor organisation in Southmead. Astry Close, which is again another anchor community organisation. We're excited to be hopefully getting on site with that quite soon. And our final one is a rural exception site, so Marshfield, very different. It makes me think, oh, look at all that space I could fill with houses, because I'm used to working in an urban environment. But this is great, and this very much brought land to us that wouldn't have been able to if we weren't working with the community. I think I did put a stopwatch on me so Rachel didn't cut me dead if I carried on too long. I'm just going to have a quick look and see how long I've got. I'm going to finish up to say I would definitely advocate working with community-led housing organisations, whether they're a CLT, whether they're an anchor community group, or whether it's just a handful of people who want to do something in the community. It feels like you're delivering an intentional community, and a community that's going to be embedded in the wider neighbourhood right from the off. They really help with that community consultation. And as the guide says, as I said, particularly with Marshfield, but with all of them, it opens up land opportunities that us as a housing association wouldn't have access to. So we both bring something to the partnership, and it expands the people that you work with, and certainly we enjoy it. And I'm really delighted that our new board has supported that and said, yes, up to 30% will be with those partnerships. So I think that's probably it from me, Rachel.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sally. And there's some lovely comments in the chat from people who work with you in Bristol, attesting to how valuable the partnership is and how great that's been. So that's fantastic to see, real kind of inspiration. So our next speaker is Vince Walsh. He's from Carbon Homes, who are based up in the northeast of England. They're a relatively new PlayShaper member, so I haven't managed to go and see them yet, but I'm sure he'll be able to paint us a great picture of the work that they're doing up there. So Vince, over to you. I think you're still on mute, Vince.
Thanks, Rachel. I don't know whether the presentation's available or not, because I did do a presentation. I don't know whether Charlotte will be able. That's great. Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. So yeah, I'm Vince Walsh, Development Manager at Carbon Homes. We work, obviously I'm a board member as well of Community CAN Northumberland, where we're looking at trying to promote smaller organisations to do more affordable housing. So there's been quite a few spin-offs since this scheme happened about 5 years ago now. So if you can move the next slide, Charlotte, that'd be great. Yeah, so getting started, this was more about how Scatter started. Obviously, they were a spin-off from Stocksfield Parish Council in 2009. They worked alongside Northumberland County Council to get a feasibility studies grant. They set themselves up as a trading arm in 2011. There's 6 directors. Obviously, they focused on affordable housing in Stocksfield. I think there was no affordable housing for 25 years in Stocksfield before this scheme. So it was quite groundbreaking, really, to be honest, to actually be able to deliver it. Next slide. So obviously, ongoing support from Northumberland County Council was really important. They had their social enterprise team, which was really helpful in terms of trying to get the actual Scatter to establish themselves and get the right skill set as well. And obviously, it was a bit of a learning curve for them as well to make sure all the members obviously had the track record and experience to deliver sort of new social housing. They worked with the local parish council. There was a joint commission housing needs survey that was done at the time, which you can see there in a picture of that. Obviously, they obviously built the actual reputation of the group on the back of working alongside closely with Northumberland County Council social enterprise team. Next slide. So the first project was 7 affordable homes, obtaining grant from Homes England, Homes and Community Agency at the time through the Affordable Housing Programme. Partnership with ISOS Housing, that was one of our previous legacy organisations before Carbon. The actual site was a brownfield site. It was actually an old snooker club, which was an asset transfer from the council, owned some of it as well. They had an existing covenant on it, so they were able to release the covenant, and there was extensive local publicity and community engagement. Next slide. So the actual scheme itself, it's a lovely spot. It's actually by a river in Stocksfield. It's actually built on, it's right next to a tennis club. There's actually bungalows there, and there's also flats at the back. That's 2 of the directors there. That's Pete Duncan, he's on the call, and Norman as well. So the thing about this scheme is that obviously it unlocked the opportunity. The actual money from the site purchase was recycled into the community as well for the sports facilities for the local cricket club. So at the time we called it sticky money because it allowed the money to be retained within the village. Next slide. So obviously there's a local lettings plan which has a strong local connection. Those are the rent levels. The partnership was based on a 125-year lease with ISOS at the time, and Scatter received a ground rent for that partnership. Next slide. So lessons learned, obviously, in for the long run, being in the right place, obviously having that good working relationship with the local council is important, attracting government money. Obviously, there's quite a few lessons learned on this one. I think Scatter were trying to establish another scheme, which didn't come off at the time, but they were looking at that. Next slide. So there's a few pictures here of the actual scheme itself. Next slide. Next slide. And it was opened by Alan Milburn. I think he lives local in the village. At the time, that's our previous chief exec, Keith Lorraine, and there's Pete Duncan there. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. So we actually won an award in 2015, an APFED award for Best Partnership, which was really good. Next slide. So in terms of, from a housing association's perspective, we felt that obviously this wouldn't have happened, this opportunity, without Scatter. They brought the opportunity to us, it would have been missed. It gave us other community benefits, obviously mentioned about the sticky money. The money from the site purchase was retained within the village, which was good news. Higher levels of grant, we got a grant level of about £50,000 per unit on this one, so it was a lot higher at the time in terms of viability. It helped us in terms of partnership working, developing those sort of relationships with external partners like the council, Scatter and the community. Developing niche products, obviously it's different, it's smaller, it's not the normal type development, obviously, that housing associations do, and obviously we've got recognition for it. Next slide. We also have done other work as well in Northumberland. We've actually done a small scheme in Prideaux, which was opened in 2016, and that involved living over the shop, where we did a new build living over the shop, where we built shops and then flats above. Next slide. So that's just a picture there of the actual shops, and then we took a lease of the upper floor, and then the council supported the development of the shops on the lower floor. Next slide. And that's it for me.
That was great. Thank you very much, Vince. Really fascinating overview, both of the kind of successes, and then also obviously, yeah, of kind of some of the challenges along the way. And I think that point about kind of needing to be in this for the long term and not expecting any quick wins, I think that's so important. You know, this is a commitment that we have to all make to each other in the long term, not just think of it as a kind of project that we'll do for a couple of years. So before we kind of open the floor to wider questions, we've got three other fantastic experts with us today. So I'm going to ask each of them just to kind of give a couple of minutes of sort of thoughts and reflections. So first of all, we're going to hear from Tony Price, who's the Programme and New Initiatives Manager at Trent and Dove Housing Association and a member of the Rural Housing Alliance. Then we're going to hear from Rebecca Slack, who's External Affairs Manager at the National Housing Federation. And then from Dave Smith, who's the Client Services and New Business Director at CDS Cooperatives and has been involved in CLT projects, I think, for a long time. Tony, if I hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and good morning, everyone. As Rachel said, I work for Trent and Dove Housing Association. We're about a 6,000 home association working predominantly in East Staffordshire, but also little bits into South Derbyshire, and we're very pleased and proud to be involved in the production of this guide, both through our own way and also through the Rural Housing Alliance. Just before I get into my remarks, as someone who works in development, it's really good to see slides with bricks and people walking around in mud. That really makes my heart sing. So it's good to see those. I think that the sort of themes I'd just like to quickly reflect on, I think Tom said in his presentation, we all want to get to the same place. We're all here to meet local housing needs and community housing needs. And yet some housing associations are very big beasts at the moment. But if you go back in the history, I think all of them started off at a community level. So I think there's some shared heritage there. I think there's a range of ways to get to meet the local housing and community needs, and I think it's all been flagged. It's not just about the homes, important as they are. It's about the wider community and being in it for the long term. So I think there's lots we can do there, and at the risk of over-egging it, there's lots of examples in the guide about the different ways that housing associations, community-led organisations can work together and work separately to achieve those aims. And there's lots of different ways to get to the same place. I would like to just reflect a couple of challenges that we're all aware of that will no doubt come in the questions, but just to sort of summarise those. And we've got the general challenges of development. Generally, we've got the government's planning changes, which are out and about at the moment, and are going to have implications for development. But there's also some opportunities, particularly with the Affordable Homes Programme that the government have launched that starts in April next year, and that bidding will open for very soon. I think there's some great opportunities to do some really creative stuff within that. And just finally to finish on, because I said one of that, I'm not just wearing my Trent & Dove hat or my hard hat to keep the development site analogy going. I'm also wearing my rural housing hat as well. And I think the guide has some examples of very good work in rural areas, and I would commend people who work in rural areas to look at those. And I suppose my one political with a small and a large P is that we talk a lot about levelling up, and I think that's very important. But there needs to be a levelling up between urban and rural as well. And I think that's something that we can do through the community work we do. So I think I'll be quiet now, Rachel, and let others speak, and happy to take questions later. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Hi, yeah, the National Housing Federation really welcomes partnership document. Pre-COVID, I had some conversations with Tom and CLT about the partnership document, so it's really good that it's come to fruition. It's really good to see. And obviously the Federation is going to support any partnership that brings about more affordable housing and creates thriving communities. I think there's some things that the Fed can do is probably dispel some of those myths that Rachel talked about what housing associations are, how there's the big ones, the small ones, the rural ones, the urban ones. You know, we've got access to all those members across the country. I mean, I work in the Northeast, so I know some of the great work that Carbon and 13 have done, but then there's also the smaller organisations such as Sally's organisation. So there's a range of members out there that we can connect with community-led housing organisations. So I think that's a key role we can be doing. And I think the key really is just to have understand the needs, have a shared vision and trust between the two organisations. And I think that's a starting point, and know what skills you can bring to the table. I think that's really my main observations. So I will pass over to Dave.
Thanks, Becky, and morning, everybody. So I'm Dave Smith. I work for CDS Cooperatives, which is a housing association. We provide services to about 30 co-ops and about 1,000 units of our own stock, just under 1,000 units if the regulator is listening. But before that, I worked for London Community Land Trust and helped set that up. So I'd support hugely everything that everybody else has said already. I just wanted to add a couple of things, perhaps from the other side, which I think was helpful. And that is that partnerships don't have to necessarily be these grand things. Never underestimate the value of being able to be a listening ear to community-led housing groups in the first instance. I remember when we were working with Poplar Harker and I had to go to the Greater London Authority, and I had a meeting with an officer there who said to me, have you cash flowed yet the grant for this? Are you going to do a golden brick or is it going to be a turnkey? And I said, I'll have to get back to you on that one. And I went away and we had a relationship with Poplar Harker, and Neil Hunt there, the development director, was able to answer these questions, tell me what the hell a golden brick was. And it was transformative in the impact that it had. So don't necessarily worry. I think these things need to be these grand gestures. I think they can be small working relationships where people can just pick up the phone, and that will move on our ability to build homes as a community-led sector hugely. And just the second thing to say is that experience of housing associations shaped for me the rest of my working relationship with the sector. It was so advantageous to us. And I think there was a point actually there where our community-led housing scheme in some ways was being set up in antagonism towards some of the work that housing associations were being done, saying it wasn't an affordable model, that we had a different solution. And it's just to underline the point that Rachel made at the beginning, which is if we're going to get anywhere close to building the homes we need, it needs to be the housing association sector, it needs to be community-led housing, it needs to be all parts of people who are in this together. So the way in which actually we as housing associations respond to community-led housing groups coming forward, I think is hugely, hugely important as well. So for that reason as well, I'd encourage you to pick up the guide and engage with people who are trying to get work done.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Those were really insightful and suitably brief comments. So thank you very much. Really kind of added some further flavour to the discussion. That was fantastic. Right. we're into the Q&A, and there's lots and lots of questions coming in the chat bar and in the Q&A, which is fantastic. Please do keep them coming. We'll try and answer as many of them as possible. I've got a couple on funding that I'm going to kick off with. I'll ask them both and then ask the respondents if they can answer. So first one specifically is for you, Sally, from Leeds Community Homes, saying we're working with several mixed tenure co-housing groups, and I'm keen to hear how communal facilities such as the ones you mentioned can be funded. And then the second question on funding is specifically about Homes England funding. And I think, Tom, it would be great if you could take this, and if anyone else wants to chip in, please do. So are there any discussions with Homes England regarding the reintroduction of community-led funding? This is a question from Sue Missin, a reflection that it was really unfortunate that this funding was stopped, and could we put some pressure on for it to be provided again? So yeah, if I come to Sally and then Tom, and then if any other panelists want to come in, please give me a wave. Sally.
Yes, I'd echo that about the funding. It would be, you know, it made such a big difference having that community-led housing fund from Homes England, and I know that NatFed and others have been putting pressure on the government, so let's keep that pressure up. In terms of, there was a question about how we funded the community house. That's a very good question, and we're grappling with that at the moment. As you know, or you might know, Homes England, we're not allowed to use any grant for anything other than housing. So the community building is not considered housing. We were hoping that we'd have some bunts out of the development to be able to do it, but in the end, we opted for, we've got ground source heat pumps there, near passive house, the spec of the houses. You'll probably have seen the topography of the site is like this. It's probably one of the most expensive schemes that I've delivered or in the process of delivering. So sadly, we didn't have the bunts, but the community, because the residents have come together early on, they are working with, and we've gifted them some money to get some designs up and running, and they're looking at raising funds to build it. So the contractors are doing the slab, and then we're going to work with the community to somehow fund it. So it will be a phase 2, building the community house. So it's a really good question. Haven't got the answer. If the scheme was a cheaper one, we probably could have chipped in more money, but sadly it wasn't. But it's going to be great, and I'm confident that we will work together with the residents and get that funding.
Thank you, Sally. And Tom.
Yes, so the Community Housing Fund has been one of the main focuses for the National CLT Network in recent years. We secured it in 2016, and it was only open for about an 18-month period from 2018 to last Christmas, and provided community-led housing groups with revenue grants to get themselves set up and then take their concept forward and get it to the point where they could get planning permission. And that gave them the ability to, you know, because obviously if you're a new organisation, very hard to get startup funding for such an ambitious and risky venture as doing some new housing. It was also really, I think, valued by a lot of housing associations that came into work with groups, both because it meant groups came to them with a more developed concept, and, you know, potentially with the land secured with some initial feasibility work already done, and also because it gave the housing association the resource through the grant that the group get access to develop a scheme. So we're very aware of how valuable it has been. It saw the pipeline of community-led homes increase from around 6,000 to over 10,000 in the Homes England system, and another 13,000 kind of in prospects. So there's a total pipeline of about 23,000 homes. We have been flat out lobbying the government on this for the last 12 months or so, and before then even, you know, to get it reopened. The current position is that it was not mentioned explicitly in the comprehensive spending review, but the Housing Minister and the Secretary of State are considering it as part of their ministerial budget for the next year. And so we are talking with the Ministry about that and whether they could have a 1-year extension to the fund to get it opened in the next financial year. And we still are pushing for a longer term settlement, because we know that, as housing associations know, housing projects don't just materialise and get developed in a year. You need a funding programme that runs for 4 or 5 years to give the kind of certainty and the window of opportunity for groups. For those in London, it's worth knowing the Community Housing Fund in London is still open. So government somehow trusted Homes England only with an 18-month programme, but it trusted the GLA with a programme that runs until 2023. So housing associations interested in partnership work in London, the door is still open to that. And we've also had discussions with the Welsh Government about whether similar funding might be available in Wales. And then of course, Scotland has its own arrangement, particularly with rural housing and so on. So it's kind of quite different around different parts of the UK, of course.
Thank you, Tom. That was really helpful. There's been a couple of questions in the chat specifically about Scotland. The guide mainly focuses on England because it was funded by Community-Led Housing, who are an England-only organisation. So in terms of kind of direct compatibility with Scottish legislation, that's not something that this guide covers, but I think the kind of examples and partnership stories will definitely be kind of transferable. So we've got a few questions now around, I suppose, challenges of getting partnerships off the ground. So one here for housing association colleagues. So Vince, Sally, or perhaps Dave, could you comment on how appetite for working with community-led groups might be curtailed by the perception of risk in the eyes of housing association lenders? And another one here from Fran asking, it feels like there's a bit of a threat to partnerships with lots of kind of culture changes and mergers going on in the housing association sector. Are there any safety nets for community-led housing groups that could be suggested kind of in the face of that? So who would like to answer either of those? Vince, have you got any thoughts on that? And then I'll come to Tony. Thanks.
Yeah, I think there's always going to be threats, isn't there, really? But I think from my perspective, it's about opportunity. So I want to make sure that if there's opportunities out there that the community can bring forward with, and we can work with communities, that we should be doing that. And it's about cooperation as well, rather than sort of competition at the end of the day. And it's like, you know, the Stocksfield opportunity wouldn't have happened without Scatter. They unlocked the opportunity. They led. It was very much community led rather than ISOS led at the time. So I think it's important to, you know, to try and establish those relationships with the local RPs, and you know, it's like I said, it's in for the long run. So it may take a long time because the projects do take quite a long gestation period as well. So, you know, you could be talking 2 to 5 years sometimes before these opportunities are brought forward, but you've got to still keep working on them for now.
Yeah. Tony, and then Becky, did you want to come in? Was that okay?
Thanks, Richard. I was just sort of echo Vince's comments really about the communicating. I mean, as I said in my remarks, I think some housing associations are very big, but if you look back in the history, it is all about the community base and the community anchor role that that housing associations play. So I think it is about sort of sticking to your guns, as it were, and keeping the sort of flame burning. That's not too emotive a way of saying it, but I do think the sort of community role in associations is there to stay, despite all the sort of mergers and the stuff that's happening there, sort of corporately, which I mean, clearly it is happening. Just comment on the risk side of things. I mean, yeah, any development has got a risk to it, and it's just about how you sort of manage that risk, and particularly with rural schemes, that can take a long time to you know, get from the first idea to actually getting people into the property. So it is about managing that risk throughout the whole of the development process. And yeah, sometimes it ain't easy, but I think the key thing I would like to give to people is just to keep the communication going, keep the talking going, even if it's just, it doesn't have to be a formal SLA or quarterly meeting or anything. Just pick up the phone, have a chat with somebody, and that's the way to get over some of these hurdles. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll come to Becky, and then we've got a couple more questions.
Yeah, I think just a couple of things. I think by the larger housing organisations, because I think some of those mergers have brought community-led organisations together with larger, and I think those larger organisations have obviously got some benefits. So size brings with it some opportunities it is. And the other thing I was going to say on a very practical level, I'm an external affairs manager for the North East, but we've got external affairs managers in all the regions. So if there's a particular housing association you want to get in touch with, we can share who those external affairs managers are. We've also got an engagement manager who leads on rural housing as well. So if you want some linking up, we can do that. We can broker those relationships. So that's a practical point at the end.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Becky. Would you mind putting your email address in the chat bar so people could get in touch with you if they'd like to take you up on that? That's fantastic. We've got a couple of really interesting questions now about kind of broader communities and community impacts, which I might come to Dave and then Tom on to start off with. So the first one is from Jane Daw, and she's saying she's really interested in hearing thoughts on the wider community benefits of the community-led housing and RP partnerships. So you know, what's the wider community benefits that we think that they can bring? And then there's another question, also from Jane, great questions, Jane, around issues about inclusion. So how could community-led housing projects potentially help RPs to truly reflect the communities that they serve, particularly thinking about BAME communities and often its lack of representation at senior levels within the housing association movement. So yeah, Dave and then Tom, if you'd like to come in on those two, that'd be great.
Sure. One of the things that I always genuinely think is most exciting about community-led housing is it's not bound by the baggage and the weight of the housing association sector's 40 years of professionalisation. That can be both a really good thing and a really bad thing. It's frequently a really good thing in terms of community engagement and the impact in the wider community, because it isn't bound by the kind of the structures which exist normally in terms of feeding into how an organisation is run. So it gives you an opportunity to learn from them and do things differently. I think of some of the Meanwhile Youth schemes that I've seen, which have been led by community-led housing and things like that, really fascinating and interesting. So I think it gives you routes into different parts of the community that aren't necessarily immediately accessed or likely to be accessed through the usual channels that people are used to working. I think it just serves as a bit of a freshener and opens eyes to different channels and can at the same time engage you with residents in your work that previously you weren't able to access.
I think I'd add that the sort of long-term benefits, I mean, Tony talked about the anchor role that housing associations play, which is exactly right. And I mentioned in my opening comments about people in community-led housing groups maybe being very similar to those people who started some of those housing associations decades ago. And it's bringing more anchors into our communities with a slightly different outlook and a slightly different governance structure that they can work in partnership together with each other to try to serve those communities. And community-led housing groups very often have a wider interest than just housing as well. So a lot of community land trusts and cooperatives, you know, they're involved in kind of, you know, as a development director, Tony would call it mixed use development, but it's kind of just the range of things that happen in their community that they can be doing. So lots of community land trusts also own shops, or there's one of us in Somerset that has taken on an old school building to open a kind of enterprise and work from home centre for people working in the village who want decent broadband. So it's the kind of long-term legacy of generating that capacity, empowering communities that you get by the two partners working together. And I think that's where the question about BAME communities comes in as well, because frankly, at the moment, the community-led housing movement isn't really any housing association movement on this. It remains a major problem, but there are some really good examples of self-build groups, co-ops, CLTs that were led by and set up by BME communities, then working with housing associations. And it presents an opportunity for, I mean, I take this responsibility very keenly on behalf of the community-led housing movement. It's an opportunity for us to also build power and capability in BME communities around the country, and to give them more of an ability to address the sort of housing issues that they face, and then to come and work in partnership with housing associations that are also trying to, again, you know, it comes back to shared values, that are also very aware of that issue.
Thanks, Tom. And I think it's a really, really important issue that we all need to be thinking about what we can, how we can do more on. I've got a couple of specific questions, and then we've probably got time for one more before we close. So there's a specific question for you, Dave. What do you see as the advantages of CDS being a community-led RP supporting community-led schemes? And then there's another specific question here from Sue Misson about so Sally, Vince, if you were able to answer this, that would be great. So when there's been a kind of partnership, who's taken on the management of the properties? And if it's the housing association, have there been kind of management agreements drawn up? So Dave, if I come to you first, and then Sally and Vince for any specific advice on that question.
Certainly, I wasn't expecting such a philosophical and deep and long question as that one. I'm not quite sure how to answer it. I think the advantages of being a community focused RP, chiefly for me, is that ultimately we have a question about whether or not housing is fundamentally a democratic exercise or not. And I think particularly in cities and urban areas where we work, it can't be anything but that. So for me to try and provide a housing service that does anything else other than start and finish with the communities it is rooted in is not the kind of service that we want to provide. It would just be a market-based solution otherwise. So I think that's the reason for it. But in terms of practical outcomes, I think it just means that we are more responsive and we're closer to things, and particularly in terms of new developments, which we're looking at the minute, I think they're going to be better and more responsive to the immediate needs of local people. So yeah.
Thank you, Dave. Can I come to Sally and then Vince on the specific kind of management question?
Yeah, sure. I'll just, if you don't mind, pick up on that, the BME, BAME question as well. Yeah. We are working with, I mean, we're very lucky to be in Bristol. The council are putting funding in as well. We've got huge funding on the Sheldon Road one, I think is about 80,000 a unit. And we are talking to two specific anchor organisations, one in St Paul's and one in Easton, that actually, you know, really did come out of that community. And we've got quite a diverse board. One of our board members, we're lucky enough, runs the St Paul's Carnival, so she's got some great links, and we're really encouraging those communities specifically to be brave and go for it, and I think they're going to. So, and in answer to your question about the management, yes, in all cases we are managing the homes for the community-led housing organisations, partly because we, you know, being a landlord is quite a complex thing, not just collecting rents, but all of the other support. We have dedicated tenancy support teams who can provide all sorts of support to the residents. Sheldon Road is a mixture of members of the Community-Led Housing Association and also people who are homeless straight off the housing register, and integrating that community. Well, the self-finish will help, but we need to make sure that people feel supported in that mixed community. So yes, we have an agreement both in terms of repairs to the homes and also the management and collecting the rents, and we're doing that for BCLT. And all the other organisations that we're currently developing for. So, and that works pretty well. You can't. It's a specialist. You know, it's tricky being a landlord, and housing associations are. You know, that's their field. That's what they're expert at. So that's a service that we offer. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, indeed. Vince, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I'll just add to that, Sally. I think we do offer a local lettings agreement as well for sort of rural housing, so it gives more flexibility in terms of managing the properties and letting the properties as well. So I think from a rural perspective, we want to make sure that there's that flexibility. In terms of providing management agreements, yes, we do that. That's part of the service, but that doesn't necessarily mean we have to, because local groups, if they want to, can manage the property if they feel that they've got the skill set to do that. So, but obviously it's like Sally says, it's quite intensive, obviously, sometimes managing properties, and it's, you know, you have to have staff that are obviously used to managing like the voids, turnover, things like that, the rent collection, that sort of thing, and managing the tenancies as well. But that doesn't necessarily preclude community groups from doing that themselves, or potentially partnering with an RP to get that sort of experience in the long run.
Yeah. Thank you, Vince. I'm really sorry we're not going to get to all of the questions. It's been great to see so many flying around in the chat bar. So we've got, I think, time for just one final one, and let's go big systems thinky rather than specific to end with. So Tony and Tom, I might come to you first on this, and then if others want to have anything erudite to chuck in, please do. So a question from Mike Wilson. He says, what makes the perfect community-led housing ecosystem?
What a great question.
Isn't it?
I would say it's a combination of knowing your local communities, your local areas, getting the right organisations, of talking, communicating, which is one of the themes that I think's come out this morning. It's talk early, talk often, understand completely, or as much as you can, everybody's point of view and the drivers, understand the local community. Engage the local community in the development, and as we just said, if at all possible, in the management. And so yeah, just sort of keep talking, keep communicating, whether it's through Zoom or hopefully as soon as possible through face-to-face contact.
Thank you, Tony. Tom.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks, Mike, for the challenging question. All of our work in the National CLT Network, and also with our Community-Led Homes Partnership, which is which produced this guide, we work with a theory of change, and we basically ask ourselves, if a community wants to do this, what's getting in their way, and how can we help them to make this happen, and how can we actually do that in a way that makes this mainstream? So this isn't a niche only available to highly capable communities. This is going to be something that's going to transform the housing system in the UK to really add that extra capacity. And so it's things like having access to expertise and support. So our partner CCH developed a training program to train people who are going to give advice to and work with communities. And I think that's open to people working in housing associations as well, if people are interested in that. There's having land coming through. So whether it's the planning system or looking enviously to Scotland and the system of land rights and community buyouts that they have there, a means for communities to be able to get access to land, access to finance. So we work with lenders and so on. And across all of those, housing associations, of course, can play a key role. And this is really about housing associations helping communities to remove those barriers and unblock them, because housing associations are well established and have the ability to get access to land and finance and expertise and so on. So this is really where this partnership becomes so important to us. And so in the perfect ecosystem, there are hundreds of wonderful community-led housing groups, and there are also dozens or hundreds of great housing associations working with them.
Fantastic. I'm going to ask Sally to come in for one final word on this point before I wrap up.
I appreciate that my slides look like fantastic big schemes, but you can also build 2, 3, 4 homes, however many. So don't feel put off. Talk to your local housing hub. We've got a fantastic West of England hub based, as I said, at our offices, and they'll help you through those tricky conversations. The early stages of, do we need to be set up as a, what kind of organisation, CIC, they're there to help. They've got training facilities, they've got enablers, and I think it's fantastic that the CLT network has enabled all of that, and the funding from locality and a number of other organisations to get those up and running, because they're the friendly people to start the conversations with, and then they can put you in touch with the RPs that want to, are up for it, who want to deal with community-led housing groups. And, you don't have to be a group at the moment. You can just be a collective of people. Talk to them and they'll help you through that early stage. Yeah, that's all I want to say.
Can I just add to that, Sally? I think, as far as I'm concerned, we're very much the producers in the film, and we're sort of, the RPs are working in the background, but obviously it's all about the community leading the project at the end of the day, bringing forward the opportunities. But it's us, we're the producers of the film. That's how I see RP's role, very much so.
I think that's a lovely analogy to end with, Vince. Thank you. So Thank you everyone so much. It's been great to have so many people here. It's been great to have so many thoughtful comments and questions in the chat. Any we didn't get time to answer, particularly ones you've addressed to specific people, we will follow up. Please do kind of keep in touch with us, Place Shapers at Community-Led Homes. We will be circulating and promoting the guide as much as possible, and really keen to see how we could continue to work together and to run future events, because I find this both kind of sort of fascinating, but also a really good opportunity to be able to kind of exchange some quite practical thoughts, as well as responding to some of those much bigger, more philosophical questions, as Dave put it. So thank you so much to Tom and to everyone at Community-Led Housing for putting so much work both into the guide and into organising the event. A massive thanks to Beth and to Charlotte, who are just kind of names on our screen, but have made all this happen in terms of all the logistics. And yeah, thank you so much for attending. And it's time for the cheesy obligatory Zoom waves now. And I think at this point I can also say Merry Christmas when it comes. Thanks everyone.